a new top-tier archetype has dropped in Master Duel that proved that Konami can design a top-tier archetype that doesn't rely on special summoning spam or absurd combos to win. Simple, yet effective. It is Dracotail. Dracotail is a fusion-themed archetype that has two main typing of dragons and spellcasters. What is unique about Dracotail is that they don't rely on just one or two powerful endboard pieces, but rather they can utilize a lot of different cards in their own engine to interact with the opponent. Individually, the Dracotail cards doesn't do much on their own, but they really came together as a cohesive package with a lot of layer disruption and a fairly decent resource generation engine. In this video, we're gonna do a full breakdown of Dracotail, what each card in the archetype does, its underlying mechanic, the strength and weakness of the deck, and how I think that Dracotail has one of the best design philosophy in the game. So, let's get into it. For ease of understanding, I have divided the Dracotail cards into these different categories. First up, we have the Roaders. Both Lucius and Key 2 Dracotail can simply search for a Dracotail monster from your deck, which means they are usually your best starters. In the second category, we have the Fusion Enabler. These are the way in the deck that you can go into your fusion monsters. The most powerful one is no doubt Dracotail 5 mana. This card has a quick effect to discard itself to perform a fusion summon of a dragon or a spellcaster monster with material from your hand or field. So basically, it's a handtrap polymerization, which is just as good as it sounds. This card is a crucial part of a Dracotail endboard, and it can also provide disruption for when your opponent goes first too. The next card is also a very powerful card, Rahu Dracotail. This card can fusion summon a Dracotail monster by using monster from your hand and field, but most importantly, it can use a monster from your deck as material. Do note that this card can only ever use one Dracotail monster from your deck as a material, because of all of the Dracotail fusion monster all require a monster in your hand as a material. Lastly, we have Dracotail Malulu, which simply has a quick effect to fusion summon a Dracotail fusion monster with monster from your hand or field while it is on the field. A pretty flexible card that can be used to start your fusion play during your turn and can be used to go into a disruption during the opponent's turn. The only problem with this card is that it contests the normal summon with your Lucius. Otherwise, it is also a pretty decent card for your endboard. And a special note about Dracotail is that Key 2 Dracotail can also become a fusion enabler only if your opponent controls a monster. This effect really helps with the deck capability of going second, while also ensure that it doesn't outperform when going first. Another category for the archetype is where I put all of the recycle and follow-up engine of the deck. Urgler can recycle itself and a spellcaster Dracotail monster, while you have both in the grave by placing this card at the bottom of your deck and then add the spellcaster Dracotail monster to your hand. So, you can use Urgler proactively to recycle a key spellcaster monster from your grave, like for example Dracotail 5 mana. Hand, on the other hand, is a more reactive card. It effect trigger when your opponent destroys a fusion monster you control to special summon a non-fusion Dracotail monster from your grave by putting this card back to the bottom of your deck. This effect is not gonna come up very often, but it is still a pretty nice installation for your fusion monster to help you maybe survive a little push and ensure that you have some follow-up for your next turn. Lastly, we have Dracotail Fixel. This card can simply revive a Dracotail monster from your grave and then return a monster you control back to the hand when it is summoned. A pretty good card in theory, but sadly it's not very good in practice because it contests the normal summon of your Lucius and your Malulu. The good thing about this card though is that it has the light attribute, which allows it to be used in tandem with other engines as a way to bridge into Dracotail. We'll talk more about that in a bit, but for now, let's discuss the payoff of the deck. For the first type of payoff, we of course have the fusion monster, which there are two of that has been released in Master Duel. The monster that you're probably gonna summon the most in this deck is Dracotail or Thalion. He requires a Dracotail monster plus any number of monsters in your hand to fusion summon. And per monster in the hand that you use to summon him, he can target and return the same number of monsters in the field or in your graveyard back to the hand. He can be used as a disruption, but for the most part, you're gonna want to use him to keep recycling your monster, whether it be a hand trap or a Dracotail monster for follow-up. Resources is the name of the game for Dracotail. This deck doesn't win very fast, especially in the mirror where it can go back and forth for a while. So whoever can trigger Orthalion effects more often is probably gonna have the upper hand. Other than that, Archetype is also a pretty big mystic at 3000 attacks. The second fusion monster here is Dracotail Golomel. This monster requires a Dracotail monster plus one other monster in your hand to make, and it simply has a quick effect to pop a card your opponent control when you activate a Dracotail card or effect. This effect does need to be the direct chain to your Dracotail effect to activate, so for better or for worse, your opponent can play around this effect by chain blocking it. One thing in common about both of these fusion monsters is that they can revive themselves from the grave whenever there are two or more monsters being sent to the graveyard at the same time, but they will be banished when they leave the field. This effect will happen pretty often during your games because the condition is pretty easy to fulfill, and it's also pretty hard for your opponent to play around it. The second category of payoff cards for Dracotail is the trap cards. These are the simple 1-for-1 disruption in the deck that are pretty limited in their scope, but still very powerful nonetheless. Dracotail Flame can negate a face-up spell on the field. Dracotail Horn can bound a face-up attack position monster on the field back to the hand. And Dracotail Sting can banish a monster and a spell or trap card from your opponent's graveyard. Also, as a bonus, each of these cards can replace themselves by returning a Dracotail card that is in your grave or banished back to your deck and then drawing a card. These cards are not only your main form of disruption in the deck, they also provide a pretty powerful recycling engine for the archetype by way of keep returning one another back into the deck to keep reusing them. But the most annoying thing about using this trap though is that one of the biggest strengths is also the biggest weaknesses. While drawing a card for their effect is nice and maybe can help you find a hand trap or maybe more monster as fusion material for your 5 mana, it also means that a single hand trap like Ash or Bell can stop the entire effect of the card, which is something you're definitely gonna have to keep in mind if you want to master this deck. Okay, now that we have seen all of the different individual cards in their role, we can more clearly judge this archetype as a whole. Dracotail doesn't want to win by complete blowout, unlike a lot of modern Yu-Gi-Oh decks that just want to build one really powerful end mode, and that is the end of it. You can clearly see that this deck doesn't special summon a ton. All of the special summoning they do are mainly your fusion monster, and you only have a very limited way to do so. So because of that, Dracotail want to win the war of attrition. They want to keep your opponent in check with a lot of small disruption, and then keep recycling your cards with your Archetype and your traps. And while that may sound like an outdated idea for modern Yu-Gi-Oh, this deck, I'll say, is a pretty successful implementation of this playstyle. And it is all thanks to the fact that this deck is highly consistent, because all of the main deck Dracotail monsters all share this one very powerful underlying mechanic. That is, when they are sent to the grave as a fusion material, they can send one Dracotail spell or trap from your deck to your side of the field. So that means that fusion summoning with any Dracotail monster gives you full access to the entire engine. You can search with Key 2, fusion summon with Rahu, which in turn also set up more spell and traps. And of course, you can very easily get your Dracotail traps from your deck to your field. So you can already see that fusion summoning in this deck provide you with a lot of value. The more monster you can use as fusion material, the more spell and trap you can set from your deck. You can set a total of 5 different spell and trap from your deck with your 6 different Dracotail monsters. And oh, I forgot to mention, some Dracotail monsters also provide some additional effects when they are used as a fusion material. These are the dragon in the archetype, and specifically, Malulu can negate the effects of a face-up monster on the field permanently. Urkala can destroy a spell or trap on the field, while Pan can destroy a monster on the field. With Malulu and 5 mana ability to fuse during the opponent's turn, this monster can also become a form of disruption on top of their ability to set a card from your deck. Okay, now let's take a look at the most basic Dracotail line to get a better understanding of how the deck actually functions in practice. Here, we have Lucius as a starter and a monster in your hand that you can use as a fusion material. Start off with your normal summon Lucius to search for your Dracotail 5 mana. Then, use 5 mana effect to fuse your 2 monsters into Archetype. Archetype now trigger to add back 5 mana from your grave back to your hand, and Lucius also trigger to set a Dracotail spell or trap from your deck to your field. The card you're gonna want to set is Rahu Dracotail. You're probably always gonna want to set this card going first, because it is just the best way to fusion summon in this archetype. But there are some cases where it is the better play to not to set this card, but rather a trap card instead, like for example, if you're under Maxi or Full Loss. This card also locks you into Fusion monster for the rest of the turn. So make sure that you go into your Link monster first, like Anaconda or Heraldic Seal if you're able to, before activating your Rahu Dracotail. Okay, now in this example, you can activate your Rahu to Fusion summon your 5 mana and your Urgula from your deck to go into your Gulamel. This will trigger both your 5 mana and your Urgula to set a trap from your deck, which in this example, I'm gonna set Flame and Hold from my deck, since they are the two most common ways you can interact with your opponent. And for the final step, you can activate your Urgula from your grave to add back the 5 mana to your hand. This is kind of the basic setup that you want with the deck. You have a pop with your Gulamel, you have a Quick-Play Fusion summon with your 5 mana, and you have your 2 traps for disruption. If you're starting out with Dracotail, this is the only combo that you need to learn. You can think of it as your tried and true with the deck. Pretty much all of the different Dracotail line are a variation of this very basic combo. The main key thing to take away about Dracotail is that a lot of their effects hang on the fact whether they can Fusion summon or not. That is why the main focus of the deck is their Fusion enabler. And of course the most important one is 5 mana. This is obviously the strongest monster in Dracotail. Not only does it provide a lot of disruption during the opponent's turn, a part of its strength is also due to the fact that this card cannot be stopped by traditional hand traps like Ash or Imperm. Pretty much the only card that can stop it is Impulse, which of course not every deck can play. That is why a Dracotail deck put a lot of emphasis on 5 mana. You want to search it with your Lucius or your Key2 Dracotail, and you want to recycle it with your Artalion and your Urgula. But the point is, the key to mastering Dracotail is shaping your play around 5 mana depending on your hand. For example, if you already have 5 mana in your hand to go into your fusion play, you can consider setting Key2 Dracotail to search for your Malulu as your normal summon instead of Lucius. That way you can have an extra fusion summon and a monster negate with your Malulu during your opponent's turn. Or another example, if you have 2 5 mana in your hand instead of 1, you can fuse Whip Hand from your deck with your Rahu Dracotail instead of Urgula to add that layer of protection for your fusion monster. And of course, depending on the number of Dracotail monster from your hand, you can expand on your play by keeping your normal summon monster on the field to go into a Heraldic Seal or go into Anaconda to bridge into Branded. These are just some small optimization with the deck, but it can be the difference between winning and losing. And while we're on the topic of improving with Dracotail, the most important thing you can learn with the deck is how to sequence your effects properly. You probably heard that you should always put Artalion effects on chainlink 1 and your other Dracotail monster on a higher chainlink. And while this is probably true for most cases to play around Bell, there are some cases where you want to put Artalion on a higher chainlink. The most common example is when there is a protection effect on the field. Let's say your opponent have a Diabell Star that you want to destroy, but they also have a Diabell's the White Witch that protect their monster from destruction. In this instance, if you are fusing into Artalion with a Pan, you would want to put Pan on chainlink 1 and Artalion on chainlink 2 to bounce back Diabell's the White Witch. So when the chain resolve, Diabell's will be off the field before Pan effects resolve, so you do get to destroy a monster in this instant. What's cool about this example is that even if they chain their Diabell Star to special summon a monster from the extra deck, you can just destroy that newly summoned monster and its effect will not trigger. Another popular example would be something like Yugioh Detonator. The concept here is the same. You want to put Artalion's bounce effects on a higher chain to bounce back Detonator before your pen destroy a monster, so that Detonator will not be able to protect it. If they also have a Yugioh Cross, you can also fuse with Urgula and put it on the highest chainlink possible to force it out. Another better sequencing you can do is when you are fusing Pan with Malulu. In this instant, you always want to put Malulu on a higher chainlink. This way you can ensure that you can always negate the monster effect before Pan destroy it, which is extremely useful against monsters that can protect itself, like for example Dark Dragoon or Yugioh Detonator. These are the two most important sequencing, but of course, there are also other small sequencing with the deck that you can improve upon. This is definitely one of those things that you will get better at the more games that you play. Just learn from your mistake and take it to your next duel. Okay, now let's talk about some of the way you can also bridge into Dracotail. Because of the way the deck is designed, if you have any way to fusion summon with a Dracotail monster, you will have access to the entire Dracotail engine. And of course, the best fusion effects out there are the one that can use the material straight from your deck. Branded Fusion is one of the most popular ways you can bridge into Dracotail. And this is all thanks to Frixel being a light spellcaster monster, which fulfilled the fusion requirement of Albion and Sanctifier. This also makes Frixel a lot more usable in actual Dracotail lists, because otherwise this is probably the worst card in Dracotail that you probably wouldn't play. So, with Branded Fusion using Frixel as a material, its effects will now trigger to set Key 2 Dracotail from your deck. And with your open normal summon, you can use Key 2 to search for Lucius. And now, we are back to the basics. And following the standard line, we will have the exact same end mode as before, but now with an extra Sanctifier, courtesy of the Branded Fusion. Brilliant Fusion is another powerful fusion spell that can also produce a similar effect to Branded Fusion. This time, we will be fusing into a Seraphonite by using a Frixel and a Nebrum, which is pretty much just the Abbas replacement for Brilliant Fusion. And Frixel will again set a Key 2 Dracotail for your standard Dracotail line. One cool thing about using Brilliant Fusion here is that Seraphonite will give you 2 normal summon for your turn. So on top of normal summoning Lucius, you can also normal summon Malulu if you have it in your hand, or for the example that I am showing here, you can also recycle your Frixel with your Atalion, and it can be your second normal summon for the turn. Frixel will be able to recycle 5 mana in place of Atalion, and you can use the extra body on the field to go into an Anaconda, which bridge back to Branded if you want to go with that route. So once again, a single Brilliant Fusion can produce pretty much the same board as a Branded Fusion. In this example, I am summoning Mirrorjade immediately from Branded Fusion, but you can still summon Sanctifier if you also play an Ecclesia in your deck. It honestly might be better because Ecclesia can also recycle herself from the grave during the end phase, which can also be a material for 5 mana on the next turn. Okay, let's go back to this end board here that was made with just one Branded Fusion, because I want to talk a little bit about the power level of Dracotail. While Dracotail is highly consistent because a lot of their cards loop back into one another, and will basically always get you to this kind of setup, which is already very good of course, but a lot of their disruption are very interactive. Their traps are limited in what they can do, and can be played around depending on your deck, or can just be very easily negated by a hand trap. Golemel Pop is not very reliable if they have any form of chain blocking. Even 5 mana is also limited in what she can do because she can only special summon Dragon and Spellcaster Fusion monsters. Which brings me to my point. Dracotail is strong, but fair. This deck is definitely a step up in terms of design for modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Unlike a lot of other decks, it doesn't rely on special summoning a lot of times to be powerful. In fact, Dracotail doesn't even special summon any of their main deck monster during their normal turn, which is also a good thing because it prevents the deck from being turned into a combo slot. The result of this is pretty great. You have an incredibly fast turn as Dracotail, and the disruption you set up are not so strong that they are just auto-win. The recycling aspect of the deck, while it is very strong, it is also not infinite. There's only so much time you can use Atalion effects in a game, and when they are gone, it is really hard to recycle them. Another aspect about Dracotail is that they rely on their traps to recycle each other for their grind game. So if you can cut them off from this resource, you will heavily cripple a Dracotail deck. Also, a little quirk about Dracotail. Urgula, Pan, and Malulu need to be able to set a Dracotail spell and trap from the deck in order for their additional effects to trigger. So, in a grind game, especially in the mirror, if you run out of Dracotail spell and trap from your deck to set, you also won't be able to pop or negate with this monster when they are being used as a fusion material. It is a rare occurrence, but it is something that is definitely worth keeping in mind if Konami can put some restriction on the Dracotail spells. With that being said though, this is more of a temporary problem for Dracotail because their new fusion monster will partially solve their grind game. Another aspect about Dracotail design that is also really nice to see is that the deck has a really good go first and go second capability. Going first, you of course have the ability to set up your traps for disruption, but for going second, you have 5 mana as an exclusive hand trap to the deck, and a lot of Dracotail monsters also have immune removal when they are being used as a fusion material. Of course, the biggest thing is that Key 2 Dracotail also become a fusion enabler for the deck on top of being a roller. With all of this combined, I would say that the deck is almost just as good as going second as it is going first, with just using its own engine without any outside help. This design philosophy for the deck also really helped with how the deck feels to play too. You don't really mind losing the coin toss as a deck that wants to go first when you are playing as Dracotail. So for me, this archetype is definitely a home run on the design. This is exactly how you build a top tier archetype that both feel good to play and to play against. There is some floodgate stuff you can do with Dracotail by using Sanctifier or some Shadow stuff, which is of course not very fun, but I would argue that the problem is more with those floodgate cards than the actual Dracotail. Dracotail is just a symptom. The only thing that may be a little bit too much about Dracotail is that Archetype can recycle some handtrap from your grave to keep reusing them. But I also think that it is something that is unique to Dracotail and it's fun to play around. Maxi is a bit much though, I do agree. In general, I do think that Dracotail is the most fair, good deck that we have had in Master Duel in a while. It is very good for beginners because it has very simple play pattern, but it can also reward high skill players as well. And even though this deck is one of the more competitive decks in Master Duel, I still recommend Dracotail for newer or more casual player in Master Duel. You will definitely have a good time learning and climbing with the deck. Of course, I do have some sample Dracotail lists here that you can take as inspiration to build your own Dracotail deck. The most popular version of Dracotail by far is of course mixing it with branded. The version that you see right here is the one that I have built with the cards that I own, so it might not be completely optimal. But don't worry, it still works very well. I don't have enough crafting points for the third Malulu and Otalion. They are nice to have, and if you pull the third copy of either of them, you should definitely play them in your deck. But you can get away with playing two if you don't want to spend your resources on them. The main UR in the deck that you should be focusing on is 5 mana and Key 2 Dracotail. Lucius and Rahu Dracotail should also always be played at 3 because you really want to see them in your hand. The rest of the Dracotail monster are more flexible and can be adjusted depending on what you want to play in your deck. I would recommend just one Frixel for your branded fusion and at least 3 to 4 slots in your deck between your Pens and your Urgolas. Even though this card doesn't do anything on their own, you still want enough density of Dracotail monster in your deck because your fusion monsters still require them. The rest of the deck is just being filled with monster handtrap because Dracotail can use them better than most other decks. On the branded side, playing with 2 branded fusion is the norm, but you can get away with playing just one because we do have Anaconda in Master Duel. Ecclesia is an optional inclusion in your deck. It gives you an extra target in your deck for branded fusion in case you draw your Frixel. It also has a nice recursion effect and is an extra fusion enabler. In the extra deck, besides the Dracotail and branded stuff, we also have some generic Dragon and Spellcaster Fusion monster that your 5 mana can fuse into. The standout staple in most Dracotail decks is gonna be Secretarion and Chaos Torsos Dragon. Secretarion can recycle one of your Dragon or Spellcaster monster from your grave by putting one monster from the other type in your grave back to the bottom of your deck. It also prevents your opponent from activating their special summon Dragon or Spellcaster monster, so it is a pretty nasty floodgate in the mirror. Chaos Torsos is also one of the more powerful fusion play you can make in the deck because you're normally gonna fusion into this monster by using Malulu as a material. That means that you will have a pop and a monster negate at the same time. Other popular inclusion in the deck is Philia Regis and Mysterion the Dragon Crown. Philia Regis is a little bit harder to summon than normal because it specifically requires a Dragon Fusion and a level 7 or higher Dragon monster. So it's gonna be rare that you're gonna summon this monster, but it does have a powerful effect to banish a card your opponent control or in their graveyard. Mysterion is easier to make, but its effect is also a lot more conditional. Mysterion only triggers to banish a monster on the field if your opponent activates a monster effect that special summon itself, or to special summon a monster with the same type. Some other option you can also consider in the deck is Titan-clad Dragon, which is good to beat over a tower like Lunarline Liger Dancer, or Rinbrum to be used in tandem with your Mirror Jade. If you also want to use a Gem Knight engine, the package I recommend is triple Brilliant Fusion, 1 Nebrum in the main deck and 1 Seraphonite in the extra deck. Moving on to another popular version of Dracotail, that is, mixing it with Majesties. This deck is definitely more complicated than the normal Dracotail list, and it leans a little bit more towards playing as a combo deck, so I'm not gonna go too deep into it. But basically, Majesties allow you to play powerful monsters like Borolot Savage Dragon and their own boss monster that also have an Omni-Negate effect. You can also summon a very powerful Floodgate in the Invoke Caliga and protect it with your Dracotail Horn. The problem with this kind of list, however, is that there's really no reliable way that you can bridge between Dracotail and Majesties. Okay, now we have some of the more fringe options with Dracotail. Dragoon is no doubt one of the most powerful fusion monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh! And it just so happened that Dracotail can summon him very easily if you play King of the Swamp to replace one of his fusion requirements. And because King of the Swamp has synergy with Polymerization, you can also play with a Fractal Engine as an additional way to fusion summon in the deck. The extra deck also includes Blue-Eye Tyrant Dragon as an additional card you can go into with King of the Swamp, and Guardian Chimera as a powerful board breaker. Next, we have a version of Dracotail that is playing with Dark and Evaporation Dragon and Light and Sublimation Dragon. The idea behind this monster is that they are of course an extra way to fusion summon in the deck, but also, on top of that, their body on the field can be used with Artalia to go into a Hope Harbinger. You can also fusion summon a Light and Darkness Dragon Lord on the opponent's turn with 5 mana by using Dark End Dragon and Hope Harbinger itself for triple Omni Negates. The last version of Dracotail that I want to share for today is Dragon Maid Dracotail. This is also one of the very fun way to play with Dracotail, and it's also very budget. This list here play a bigger package of Dragon Maid that also include 1 Hospitality and 1 Tidying. You can cut those if you want, but this deck has a lot that it can do. On top of all your normal Dracotail play, you can also have access to 2 powerful Dragon Maid cards, that is Yugioh Dragon Maid for an Omni Negate and a House Dragon Maid that can both be a fusion enabler and a recycling engine for the deck. The biggest negative point for the deck is that your Dracotail monster and your Dragon Maid monster will contest the normal summon with each other. There are some other ways you can play with Dracotail too. This deck is flexible enough to do that, but these are definitely some of the more competitive Dracotail lists that you can play. I will be including some replay for this branded Dracotail version of the deck to showcase how the deck performs in practice. I hope you guys have been enjoying learning about Dracotail in this video. If you have been enjoying the video so far, please leave a like on the video and subscribe to my channel. I really appreciate it. Personally, I do really enjoy playing Dracotail, and the fact a deck like this is good, I think is a healthy sign for the game. So please enjoy the replay of the deck, and I hope to see you in another video. Decklists.